Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after 580 odd days, we finally got to see a ball kicked in anger live at the MCG. Well, at least 21,000 of us and a few token Docker fans too. We've banked a win, and we're sitting so high up on the ladder that I'm getting dizzy, but let's not get ahead of ourselves and let's take this 1 week at a time. We have a full deck on board with us tonight. Returning back to the Demonland podcast tonight is longtime co-host Grapeviney. Welcome back, Grapeviney.
Thanks, Andy. Look, it's great to be back on the show and be back at the footy. And at this stage of the season, it's hard to see how we can drop out of the top four when I sort of look forward. So happy times ahead.
Also joining us tonight is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Grapeviney. Good evening, Ben the Man. Good evening to all the listeners. We've had a win for the men, a win for the women. So it's a great way to start the season and a great way to intro into this podcast tonight.
Yes, what a time to be alive. And last but certainly not least, long-time caller turned co-host, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good morning. Good evening, everyone out there in Demonland. And it doesn't happen very often on a weekend of footy where you beat Freo twice. That was something to see. Great, two fantastic games. Well, at least one of them was. And I had a mate point out to me who listened to the podcast last week that we talked about 20% more ups and downs this year because of the extra game time. He was keen to let me know that there's, in fact, with 23 games, not 17, there's 62% more ups and downs this year. So let's hopefully there's more ups and downs.
Definitely. Well, let's get straight into it. Let's talk about the match, the first match, the men's game. Stephen May and Jake Lever were absolute brick walls in defence, 19 intercepts between them, seven contested marks, 42 disposals between them, possibly as good as any defensive duo in about 3 decades. Grapeviney, who were our in 89? Was it Peter Rode? Was it Sean White and Peter Rode, or was Jamie Dersma in there?
Dersma was still around in those days. Peter Rode might have been a year or two later, but Sean White, I think Danny Hughes was still around in 1988 too. So plenty of good defenders back in those days. But you're right, the dominance of May and Lever on the weekend was outstanding from the get-go. They set the tone in the first quarter by just intercepting everything, basically. And at no stage of the day did Freo look threatening forward at all because of their dominance.
George, I just saw actually Melbourne posted something that we had 26 intercept marks for the game. I think that's absolutely incredible. How do you find our backline performing?
Oh, that's as good as I've seen the backline performing, like you've mentioned, since the 80s. Backline with those players previously mentioned, but I think not only just Lever and May, Tomlinson, for the first time that I've seen, actually looked really confident in what he was doing, and he was a fantastic backup to Lever and May when needed. Nev Jetta, who I thought might have been well past it, shut down their small forward in Schultz successfully, and given what happened the last time we played Fremantle, where Walters, I think, kicked 3 goals. That was a dramatic turnaround from that aspect. And Christian Salem, always ever reliable, and as good a game from him as we've come to expect as well. So it's really a solid group down the back there. We can't complain anything about what's happening, but really top notch, defending, particularly from May and Lever. I'm very grateful for our recruiting side for picking up those two players in past years. It's really solid.
Big man, anything else to add to the back line?
Oh, not too much other than what's been said, except for Mays was awesome last year, so he sort of carried on from where he left off, and he's become one of my favourite Melbourne footballers. But Lever, really, I said that after the Dogs practice game, that was the best game I'd seen him play for the D's, and he's just topped that, and that was definitely the best game I've seen Lever play for us. And he looked fantastic, and he looked really confident with his lateral movement. There was one where he sort of turned back inside, and it was exactly that movement where I sort of had a bit of a heart thing myself. My heart was in my mouth a little bit. It was that sort of turn back in that he wouldn't have done in his first season after his knee, in the first sort of even 18 months after his knee. And I was thinking about how well he's marking, but how strong his marking technique is. He's was marking it out in front of his eyes, and he just looked super confident. And he was getting good depth on his kicks as well. So between them, that's the two fantastic players. I was thinking potentially the two best bigs we've had since Hughes and Sean White played together.
Yeah, if you get a chance, head over to Twitter and probably on Facebook as well. The MFC have posted a video of the. I'm not sure. I haven't watched the whole thing, but the 26 intercept marks. It's good viewing. Let's talk about.
Sorry, just while we're talking about our backline, does that still include Oscar McDonald? Could we praise his excellent game too? Do we take credit for that?
Great.
Well, that was a lot of on social media, on Demonland. There was a lot talked about Oscar playing. He was subbed in, and within, I think, 202 seconds had kicked a goal for Carlton. I think we only tried him ever down forward once.
I think the comparison is it took him 8,000 to kick his first goal at Melbourne, and 2 or 3 minutes to kick one at Carlton.
I'm looking forward to the Carlton game because, I mean, really the key question will be how will we stop Oscar up forward? I mean, May, Lever, sure, they're good players, but they're going to have to be on top of their game to shut him down.
Look, it was quite comical, actually. A lot of the stuff I read on social media and on Demonland, I think the same people that were screaming at the club to get rid of Oscar were now bagging the club that we got rid of him or didn't try him up forward, but you can't win. Let's talk, as I said, something I wasn't too impressed with, and B-Man, you reckon you've got the statistics to back all this up, but our clearances, stoppages, and our defensive running by our mids, I think, is still a massive issue. There's something terribly wrong, I think, when you have 40 hit-outs to 17 and you still lose the clearances 35 to 27. Big man, did you see it that way? What's your thoughts on that?
No, well, I actually thought the clearance differential was not the sort of cause of concern that many are making out, including your good self there, Andy. I think it's been a pretty significant tactical shift, and that, like many clubs, we're modelling lots of our elements of our games on the Tigers, and the Tigers famously not so fussed about clearances. I'm not saying they're not important, of course they are, but in the premiership years for the Tigers, they're routinely at the bottom or near the bottom of the clearance differential table. And I think that we just talk about Lever and May and their intercept markings. Partly that's a big function of the way we've tactically shifted to not have such a strong emphasis on winning the clearances and being much better set up behind the ball. I think it's quite a big tactical shift that really sort of started happening last year, but particularly in the back half of last year. In the first 2 or 3 years of Goody's season, his coaching, was obviously a big emphasis for us. In 2018, we were fourth in clearance differential with 2.4, and the Tigers, they won the flag. They didn't win they were on the bottom with 5.6 in 2019. We were third in clearance differential. So again, with +3, Tigers were 16th that year. The Eagles were 0.37th, and last year that shifted a bit, and we were 1.4, and I'm pretty sure after halfway that was down. So we were 6th in clearance differential. And the Tigers, again, flag winners. They were 16th on that differential table. So I really think that it's not the concern that people think it is. Obviously, you don't want to be. We were 8-zip down at one point. It ended up being 8-zip for the game. So obviously, that was about the 20-minute mark of the first quarter. Obviously, from that point on, Goody responded in the box and made some changes, and so we broke even after that point. But I just think that they've taken that line through the Tigers and also the Hawks, who famously, they were near the bottom of that same table when they won their flags. So I just think that it's
The difference is they're winning flags and we're not.
yeah, but I mean, we're going to take a leaf of what wins flags for teams, and I think we've set up defensively behind the ball, and that's that pressure on the ball carrier. Once the clearance is lost, that's the key thing, and then they dump kick it into the 50, and we intercept mark. I mean, how often has exactly the reverse happened for us, and we dump kick the ball into the 50 only for a McGovern or a Richmond defensive player to mop it up and take that intercept mark. So, yeah, I don't see it as a major issue. Obviously, we don't want to get smashed in there every week, but I think it's not the concern some might think it is.
It was interesting, wasn't it, the change of personnel in there, in that we saw the likes of Cozzy and A&B and Sparrow all getting a run. It'd be interesting to see. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's been posted on the board, a breakdown of the midfield minutes and attendance at stoppages. I don't know. Has anyone got that data?
No, I don't. I don't have that data.
Might not be
and
yet.
gathering by the silence, I don't think anyone else has been.
No, I think that was interesting. I was wondering during the game whether we were running a second experiment and trying people like A and B and Pickett and giving the opportunities to Sparrow and Jordan during this time, and we weren't giving the opportunities to Brayshaw and Jones. So I thought that was interesting. And to pick up on Ben Mann's point before, it's not, you don't want to lose the clearances, dramatically in that sense, but Fremantle, despite winning the clearances, didn't gain any advantage out of it. Like Ben Mann pointed out, they might have got it out, but it finished up in the hands of Lever and May and the other backmen and promptly went the other way. So you're right. There's been a change in the way that the midfield group is being restructured and they're positioning around the ball, such that even if you lose the clearance, it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, and I saw the scores at one point. The point was made on the thread. I posted that on the thread about the post Fremantle game today, actually, and there was the good point made that Freo's kicking was pretty diabolical, but often that's a function of the pressure on the ball carrier. I mean, ours was pretty diabolical as well. That was the biggest problem I saw in our game. Again, it's a constant. Hopefully, we're improving it with Bowie and some of the players that we're bringing in. But at one point, I saw the scores, and from turnovers, I think we were like 75-80% of our score at that point, and it was deep in the last quarter, was from turnovers, and part of them are the turnovers that the dump kicks into 50, I'm sure, obviously, and then we're transitioning from the back half. So we're setting up well behind the ball. That's one part of it. So the dump kick comes in, and we a player like Lever and May intercepts. But then the critical thing is we're set up ahead of the ball really well, and our transition end to end was really strong, and that was something that we improved in heaps from the middle of last year, where we started to transition around that Crows North game, where we started to transition the ball much better. So I think that those sort of structures and systems are a bit. I think we're moving away. Obviously, contested ball is still important, but just not those clearances aren't the same KPI that they were for Roos and then Goody's first 3 seasons.
I guess the important thing is that we do it against the good teams as well, because this was against an undermanned Freo. You mentioned those 2 games in the middle of the year were against the 2 bottom
Yeah.
teams. It's all good and well to do that when you're playing, well, witches' hats maybe, but we've got to be able to do that against the big guns in the
Yeah.
competition. And, I get what you're saying. You've got to be able to do it and do it well, but then you've got to be able to back it up against the good teams.
But you look at Richmond statistically, it's remarkable. They're consistently near the bottom of the clearance differential table, and they're the best team, arguably. They're one of the best teams probably in the last 50 years, realistically, them and the Hawthorn dynasty under Clarkson, who are also down the bottom of that same table. So there's got to be something in it in terms of tactic and setups.
They're all good disposers of the ball, which I found on the weekend quite frustrating. I thought we were quite sloppy, George, as you mentioned in your match report, scrappy and sloppy. There were a lot of missed kicks. A friend of mine thought that it might have been as a result of them using a new ball every quarter, but I'm sure that's nothing new in the AFL.
It's a bit of round one rust, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Is it? I don't know.
I saw those kinds of mistakes all throughout the weekend, and it's the old cliche of blowing out the cobwebs, as they say. So I didn't think it was any worse than usual, or any worse than other teams playing over the weekend.
Let's talk about some of our younger players. There was a big tick for a few of them. I thought Jordan. I thought he was really great in his first game. Sparrow, whilst he was out of his depth without the backup of most of our senior mids in the practice game, he's hardworking. He's a handy backup to bring through there. Cozzy showed some real spark. Like every time he sort of got the ball, it would have been amazing had he taken that mark.
Shouldn't have been
He's
penalised.
what's the penalty is unrealistic attempt. I thought that was quite a realistic attempt.
I actually
I think it
thought
was a
he
bit early.
played a push rather than the unrealistic one, but Cozzy's had the unrealistic one paid against him before, even though he got a hand to the ball. So if you get a hand on the ball, it's not unrealistic at all. It's a chance to
That
mark
was
it.
against Richmond, I believe, last year.
Yeah, that's right.
He's very close to having that breakout game. When you would talk, I wonder, before I go to some of the other guys, what do you think the coach was, what statement was he, well, not a statement, but what was he doing? He put Cozzy into the middle for the first bounce, and then I don't think he came back into the centre till later in the game. What do you reckon? Was that just to try and get him into the game?
Well, I think, to be honest, well, perhaps this is confirmation bias, but I think that it speaks to George's point about the setup, the differences in the setups, where you had Harms in there, who hasn't been in there for all of last year, and and Jordan in there for a young fella in there. He was in there for a fair chunk of the game as well, and I think it's to do with sort of the less emphasis on winning the clearance at the coalface. I mean, there's a bit of an overemphasis on the centre bounce because there's clearances all around the ground, but I think he'll play a bit through the centre, and it's that speed, the breakaway speed from the contest, both defensively and offensively, that's super important. And I think he'll play all over the ground, and so he'll play centre for sure, and mid, and of course up forward.
Yeah, but I'm more talking. He put him in the centre for that first bounce, and he clearly wasn't going to be playing there. As a midfielder, he was going to be a forward to start off the game. But I guess he just wanted him to get in right in the mix of it straight from the beginning. Rivers, go ahead, George.
Yeah, it could be also another type of exposure to a different tactic, in the sense that we had A and B in there and Pickett in there, who aren't ball getters by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe it's about this limiting the opposition to be able to move the ball freely, even if they get the possession. So it's hard to say off the back of one game, but it's certainly very interesting as to why these players are being put in there in lieu of, like I said, genuine ball getters like Brayshaw and Jones. So we'll have to wait to see what unfolds in the next couple of games. I think it'll be very interesting.
Rivers, I thought, made a couple of howlers into dispose White, but no doubt there's a bright, future for him. There were a few things that he did that I really liked. And then, there's Luke Jackson. I thought he had a fantastic last quarter, let down by some real inaccurate kicking in front of goals. I think they've got to get him out on the park just having shots at goals one of these training sessions this week. But looks like he'll be really dangerous. Anyone want to talk about our young boys?
And George can back me up on this because George was seated. We were seated near one another. We were right behind Langdon's goal in the first quarter, and Luke Jackson holding the handball off for a moment was just pure magic in my eyes. It just shows how smart he is, and look, he was sort of quietish, I suppose. Until the last quarter, but I thought he was, was generally in really good position in marking contests, and then what we saw in the fourth quarter is just a glimpse of the exciting future that's ahead.
I couldn't agree more. He's going to be a star, and I mean the last player I was as excited about watching. Two of them now, Cozzy and him, they're both going to be stars. But the last time I had the sense of, we're looking at a future star as Hogan, and for the D's, and leaving side with it.
How did that turn out?
Well, yeah. So, if he'd stayed at the D's, there would have been no problem. But he elected to leave, so I don't care. So it's a moot point. But he's going to be fantastic. He's also a very clever, natural footballer. And I was going to say about the young guys, I don't think Rivers will turn it over as many times as he did for the rest of the season combined. He's, and I love the way he goes about it, but the enthusiasm those young guys bring to the team, and they're all really positive, energetic fellas. It seems like Jackson as well. But they're, all of them are natural footballers, and I think for a long time I've been critical of the club for, focusing on those contested ball winners, and at the cost of good footballers in terms of skills. And there was a couple of bits of play that really jumped out for me. Cozzy, who is just a clever footballer, and again a natural one. He, it's people have been critical for years about the how many Melbourne players go to the contest. He stood off the contest. I think it was in the third quarter. He let the Melbourne player go one-on-one with the Freo player, didn't go to the contest, sat off the contest. The D's player, and I forget who it was, won the contest and handballed out to him, and he turned, took 3 steps and kicked it into Spargo just inside 50. It was like a beautiful bit of football, but it was exactly what we haven't been doing in the last few years. And other players would have run to that contest and made it a 2-on-1, won the ball, but had no one to give it to. And there was another play from Jordan, who seems, that's the first time I've really seen Jordan other than the practice game, like in a full game. And he just waited to kick beautifully to, I think, Brayshaw out on the wing, where it meant that the opposition player couldn't get to the contest. And it just was a bit of natural football that I've been, really desperate to see from D's player. And they're looking pretty exciting group of young players coming through for my eye.
Also, the kick that he kicked to Jordan. This is Jordan kicked to Spargo into the square for Spargo's goal. Was a really nice weighted kick, and I know Spargo was sort of by himself, but I've seen teams make meals of kicks like that, and that was fantastic. George, you want to add anything on the younger brigade?
Just to back up what Binman was saying, they're all smart footballers. Even Jordan's goal. In a very tight situation, he had the smarts to get it onto the boot. There was no thinking required. He just did what he needed to do. The other thing I think that all of them have is the kicking ability. Good delivery, which Binman in particular has been crying out for years, and all of a sudden we've got 3 or 4 good players who can deliver the ball reliably and weight it beautifully that you can take advantage of. So yeah, there's lots and lots of upside there between this group. It's going to be very exciting over the next 12 months and beyond.
And on that, George, wasn't it just fantastic to see Kickett go back and kick that first goal, the first goal for him and our first goal? It was a beautiful kick, and dart straight through. And it's like, yeah, that's what we want.
It was a nice tribute to his late mother as well, which was nice. Two very much maligned players. Certainly, I see on social media and on Demonland, Alex Neil-Bullen and Charlie Spargo, I thought played decent games. Charlie Spargo in particular, he's kicking into the forward line. I think he's probably one of our best kicks into forward line. So it'd be good for him to get the ball sort of on the half forward flank kicking in. I think he's one of the better deliverers into our forward line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
just another. Sorry,
no, you go,
Brett,
George.
I was just going to say he's despite his size, he's just another natural footballer, and he knows when to deliver and when to hold back. If he was another couple of inches taller, we'd have a real star on our hands with him. But he's just a great natural footballer. So again, complementing the other players that we've just talked about.
Yeah, and look,
That's great, Bunny.
Talking a moment ago about smart footballers, Spargo fits into that category. 3 goal assists, 3 inside 50s, and 2 marks inside 50. Went at 87% disposal efficiency, and 7 of his 16 possessions were contested, along with 5 tackles. So they're very good numbers for a half forward. And if he can keep that kind of output up, then he's going to be a really important player.
And just on Neil-Bullen as well, because usually we're quite critical that he doesn't get enough of the ball. He did have 17 disposals, and I think he had behind Oliver for 5 clearances, which Bimana said doesn't actually matter for our game. But I just wanted to put that out there. I thought he played a much better game, and it's good to see because if you're going to be in the team, you've got to be able to, get the ball.
Well, on A and B, as I said in the last podcast, he's not a chance of getting dropped with the aerobic demands of footy, the 75% and 30-minute quarters. He's a lock, and with the distance he covers, I didn't see what distance he covered in this match, but he works super hard, and whilst there's he'll be in there whilst that's a big feature of the game. And just the other thing about it, I was just going to say there's a spot on grapevine about Spargo. He's a neat kick, and I really like the fact he goes for things within his wheelhouse, doesn't go for high risk. He's really reliable kick, and it just can't be overstated how important even simple looking kicks are, that the chains don't break down because of a stupid error where a target's not hit. And it makes me wonder when you think Rivers, now Bowie, Laurie, Rosman, not so much, but and a few other players that we picked up, that maybe Cozzy and Jackson, who both got X Factor, that maybe Taylor's finally been given a bit of free rein to have more of a say on the type of player we pick up, because previously, as I've sort of said before, I think we've focused way too strongly on those contested ball winners at the expense of good kicking skills and being natural footballers. And Jordan's probably the other one. And I didn't realise, they said during the commentary, that he only played a handful of TAC games. So that's a pretty risky pickup given there's not much background. So Taylor obviously rated him pretty highly.
A couple of other players that were all but written off last year, I thought had decent games and all proved that they had more to give, and that's Tommy Mack, and I'll speak more about him in a moment. But the other two, Jones and Jeddah, I think one of you mentioned Jeddah. That was certainly probably his best game he's had. Last year wasn't great for him, but Jonesy, I think he's sort of. But a lot of people had written him off and thought he's not going to get to 300. But I think he very well might get there this year. What are your thoughts, George? I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, it's good to see all of those three players fulfilling their role, and we'll talk about Tommy Mack shortly, but he's essential to us at the moment in the absence of anybody else who's at all in the forward line. The Jonesy, I think, will get to 300 quite easily. I think he is very resilient, and when we're looking for 23rd players as the season progresses and as injuries start to hit and tiredness hits these younger players, he's only got to play another 5 games to reach that target. But he's a nice player in the sort of the mould of I'm thinking of the Hawthorn player. Coming back, when needed, comes in and just does his job in those tight situations and has the body to keep on going. Jetta was the same, very pleasing. He certainly beat his man comprehensively one-on-one during the game. It'll be interesting to see how he goes against speedier opponents,
Yeah,
perhaps,
yeah.
but you can only do what you've got to do, and he did it very admirably during the weekend. Nice to have him at the back of Lever and May and Tomlinson and Salem and Rivers. He's just that final backstop, and he did it brilliantly.
We'll talk about T Mac. His form in particular was very promising, kicking the 2 goals, taking those 9 marks. Look, at the moment when we've got 2 big tools in the stands, at least for the next month, and possibly a bit longer. I think they're 4 and 5, maybe 6 weeks away. That's Wiedemann and Brown. It's important to have T-Mac there. I'll go back to you, George, because you mentioned in your report that a few times he was left the only big man. How are we going to sort of manage the tools? Because I think you need 2 guys down there, and if we're we've been big on robbing Peter to pay Paul type of thing. What do you see in terms of our forward line, or what would you like to see?
I think we're going to see that's what we saw last weekend for the next couple of weeks at least. We just hope that Jackson can get a little bit more confidence and things like that. But somebody's got to do the backup ruck role, and Jackson seems to have been appointed in that role. So it just leaves us with that one forward. We're sort of fortunate. I don't think Fremantle had a great back line. St Kilda are missing a lot of their big backs as well. I watched a lot of the GWS game that St Kilda played in. They're totally dependent on scoring from turnovers in the opposition's half back line, but as a back line of their own, they're just not great. They really struggle. So we should be safe, I would think, with Tommy Mack and Jackson doing their bit. Fritsch is always a nice, reliable sort of backup for a couple of goals. If he could only kick straighter, we'd all be happier. But while Tommy's doing his job, we'll be very grateful for that. We're very grateful he didn't move on.
Yes, Ian, in hindsight. Fritsch is a bit frustrating, Fritsch, because he can get the ball. He's a good lead up and can take a mark, but his kicking's really let him down. I thought when he started that he was he's dead eye straight kick, and he's really let himself down. I think he even didn't make the distance at one point. So yeah,
He was a dead-eye Dick in his first year. There's no doubt about that, and I don't know whether it's confidence or something with his technique, but he sort of often finds himself saying about a 45-degree angle, 40, 45 out, and not really reliable from that sort of range, which is a bit of a shame because although Freo missed a number of shots too, I thought we missed many more gettable ones, and probably the result should have been another 3 or potentially 4 goals than what it was. So I think even though it was a bit of a makeshift forward line, it functioned pretty well.
Yeah, I thought Freo's a lot of their misses were sort of hurried, rushed sort of kicks under pressure, whereas we missed some, set shots,
Some absolute doozies.
which you should be getting. B-Man, anything to add about our forward line setup, or in particular, if you want to talk about our connections inside 50, because I think we weren't. I don't think we were bombing it in as much as for 2019, 2020 style. But I was thinking during the game that Ben Brown would be having nightmares about some of the delivery into the forward line because it wasn't great at times. But thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just firstly on Tom McDonald, I was thrilled how well he played, and as you know, we talked about last year, he was clearly overweight last year. You know, who knows what the issue was there, whether it was injury, fitness. You know, a lot of stuff would have gone on with that whole hub stuff and COVID. Difficult year for
Well,
all.
there was word that he was told to bulk
Yeah,
up. I don't know how true that is,
I just can't
but
believe that. I mean, why would they do that and then play him high up the ground, not play him deep? I just like that doesn't ring true for me because it makes no sense really. But who knows? I don't. That, but he was. Funnily enough, the commentary was not as bad as it often is, and they made a good point that it's the best he's played since 2018, and I think so too. He was terrific. He was in the game a lot, and he was putting that touch on the one percenters on. And getting up the ground and really sort of stretching for those marks, looking, using his I don't think he's ever going to be laterally a great player left and right. But being able to run his defender up and down the ground is his go, and get on the end of those clearing kicks from May, up the ground. I thought he was terrific. And to be honest, if I was Sam Weedham, I'd be pretty nervous because I'd rather, for me, an informed Tom McDonald in that sort of form is a better footballer than where Wiedemann's at the moment. And, hopefully that will change and Wiedemann will go up at a level, but he'd need to get to that level that Tom McDonald played. And then just, as I know, he's not super mobile, but you mentioned Grapeviney, that beautiful sort of weighted handball and delay that Jackson did to give off Langdon's goal. Well, what's his name? Tom McDonald did a beautiful sidestep to give Harms his goal. It was a delightful bit of work. So yeah, I was super pleased, and all power to him.
A few disappointing players. I thought I wasn't impressed too much with the games of Brayshaw, Harms, and Hunt. Hunt in particular disappointed me. I preferred him as a forward. They're playing him back, and I think he's going to have his position taken by Hibberd very, very shortly. George, thoughts on those three players?
Yeah, have to agree about Hunt with your assessment, Andy. It was just a repeat of the Richmond practice game for him. I don't think he's a natural defender, unfortunately. No. He was. They're probably trying him in that back line to try and provide some drive out of it. But if you're not getting the ball and your opponent's getting the ball, you're not really serving your purpose. So very disappointing from his perspective. Brayshaw and Harms are interesting, and I think it just depends on the way that you look at what their roles were. Brayshaw was obviously told, you are the winger today and you shall not pass the 50-metre line. There was someone mentioned that at one stage Petrarca was trying to get into the midfield and he was late, and he signalled to Brayshaw to go in, and Brayshaw said no. So he was under instructions, under no circumstances are you going in there. So it's hard to judge a midfielder's output when he's not actually playing in the midfield. It was only his first game back for quite a considerable time after his foot injury last year. So I think we've just got to wait and see what the coaching staff and the conditioning staff are requiring of him before we become too critical. Harms is difficult again. I think the rotations through the middle, it was good to see him back in the middle. I'm not sure because of so many people moving through there what the actual role that we require of him was in this particular game. His delivery wasn't as good as what the standards perhaps that are now being expected of him. So he needs to pick that up if he wants to keep his role in the side. So Yeah, it's an interesting one for those three. We'll see what happens at selection time, but I suspect Jaden Hunt's going to be replaced by Hibberd this week at least.
Anyone else want to weigh in on either those guys or anyone else you want to highlight before we sort of move on?
No, I just note that D. Zephyr in the chat room mentioned Gus being on the wing all game, and that there's a bit of talk in the Angus Brayshaw thread that he could be used there all season, and has asked for our thoughts. And George has just answered with his, and I guess we've got to wait and see what happens with selection. But he's in my opinion, he's not a natural winger, and I think he plays his best footy in the middle. And I was surprised that, given the number of people that did go through there on the weekend, that he wasn't one of them. So,
which might
especially with Harms not playing, as far as I could tell, the tagger role that he did so well in 2018.
Yeah, which Grapevine might speak to them trialling Gus on the wing if they, trying to embed down that position. It's a really curious one with not so much Gus, because I think it's sort of his upside is pretty clear. He's pretty slow for the wing for mine, but he should be a better kick than he seems to be. He gets good depth, but Harms, I can't quite get a handle on it. It sort of depends on, as you suggested, George, what role they've got him playing. And I don't think he doesn't strike me as a smart footballer. He might be a smart bloke off the field, but he's at his best when he's following good footballers. So, but again, they, as you said, Grapevine, they didn't really play him as a tagger, and Fife was running wild at one point, and they didn't elect to tag him. So, I don't know whether he's strong enough in the midfield, but maybe it's that running thing that they're looking for. I quite like the idea of him on the half-forward flank, although he wasn't hanging on to his marks. And Hunt's similar. He just doesn't get enough of the footy, but that run, maybe on the big grounds, maybe there's, they're saying they need that run and his athleticism, but he just doesn't get enough of the footy. But yeah, so it's a bit hard to tell with those two, because you don't really know what their job is. But surely Hunt must be on thin ice.
The other disappointing thing to come out of the day for me, and possibly for everyone, including the club, was the disappointing crowd in terms of numbers. And, fair enough, there is we were playing an interstate team who, there's obviously issues with going back over the border, even though you can, but in these times of COVID, you don't want to get caught back on one side of the border, not be able to get back in. But 21,000 certainly is disappointing. Grapevine and I spoke with Gary Pert, and we'll talk about that interview a little bit later on, but he seemed to think, and I don't know if it was wishful thinking or that's where it was trending towards, but he thought 27,000 would be the number. He did mention that usually a Melbourne Fremantle is about 25,000, but given that none of us had seen live footy, unless you'd been in Queensland for 12 months, if not more. Disappointing crowd, George.
Can I just before George gets in there, and you mentioned Gary Pert. Caroline Wilson pointed out on TV last night that Gary Pert, not too long ago on radio, said that he was estimating 40,000 attending, and that was in the context of the games potentially being moved. Hawthorn and Essendon wanting to play on the G and get a bigger crowd. So Pert said at the time that he was expecting 40, and we got about half of that, and he's changed his estimate considerably.
Well, I never thought.
Up until the point where he spoke to us.
I never thought we'd get 40 for that game, but I did think we'd be getting anywhere between 25 and 30. And then when I saw that it was going to be a nice day, people hadn't been to the footy. And I know there's other factors. There's the fear of COVID, which obviously didn't impact other games. Do we have perhaps an aging supporter base that those fears might be an issue, or else being an aging membership base, maybe not too familiar with how to use a computer to get the tickets the way we have to get it. There was the other suggestion that MCC had only a certain amount of allocation to it, so that could have been a big factor as well. George, do you buy any of that, or are we just an apathetic supporter base?
I think you've got to look back. I think one of the Demonland posters put up some previous history of Melbourne Fremantle games, and quite honestly, most of them were mid-20s in terms of numbers at the best of times. So to think it was going to be anything more than that, I think, was a bit hopeful. But given the how Ticketek made it as difficult as possible to get a seat or a ticket, it's not surprising that people got frustrated or couldn't be bothered, particularly for the MCC, where people are used to just simply rolling up and walking through the door. There were no walk-ups allowed, which makes it even more difficult. Fremantle have a very low supporter base in Melbourne compared to, say, a Port Adelaide or a Brisbane or a Sydney. So again, it's not surprising the numbers that came out of there. They had obviously closed off the Ponsford stand and the Olympic stand, or the top decks in those. So what that meant was Ticketek, when you, as a general admission member, tried to buy a ticket into what would normally be a GA area, the only ones available were reserve seating in which they would then sell tickets to. Sell to you rather than allowing you to come through the gate. So all of these things combined, I don't think it was at all surprising that only got that number. It would have been nice to get more. Yeah, fantastic. But when you put impediments about people trying to get through the gate who want to come through the gate, that's the sort of results you'll get.
And must be a night to disagree with you, Andy, because I reckon it's the biggest non-story of the week, because I mean, 21,000, 25 would be the average. And I did get tickets and couldn't go, which is another story altogether. But it was a complete pain in the neck to get the tickets. And I didn't want to pay $30-40 for the mid-tier one. I couldn't go to the top of the Ponsford anyway, even if I wanted to. And they'd put me down in the pocket where I got my tickets, where at ground level, where I wouldn't sit, ordinarily unless I had to. And all of those factors that George just mentioned was, big factors for D's. And the other thing that really frustrated me is, so what? Like 21,000, the Pies didn't sell out their game. The Pies have got twice as many members as we've got. There were 4,000 seats unsold for the Pies Bulldogs game. Well, where was the criticism for the Pies fans to not fill that? I mean, I just think it's a non-story. And the other part of it I really didn't like was the controversy about us. I heard one of the I forget the woman's name, the host on Fox Footy at halftime, saying the controversial decision not to move the game. It's our home game, as you're talking about the Gary Pert. I mean, where's the controversy? It's our choice. The only controversy would be, if you have to answer the members for maybe we could have got a better deal elsewhere, but Pert took that off the table with all of the problems there would have been. It's our choice, our home game. I was really, frustrated with both the coverage of it and the criticism of the crowd. I just think we cop enough stuff as Melbourne fans without copping that one.
And no snow this weekend either, given the weather. Um, so that's no excuse. Yeah, it was all a bit being at the game. They sort of, it was obviously 50%. 50%. It's going to be moved up to 75%, but they, it's all a bit of COVID theatre, I think, with how they allocate the seating. Because we had seats. They didn't put. There was no one next to me. There was quite a few. There was probably about half a row, and then there was another two people, and then sort of about 5 seats in between them, and then another 2 or 3 people. But so they're obviously putting distance between me and the person next to me, but there was certainly no distance between the person screaming into my head behind me, nor any distance between me screaming into the head of the woman in front of me.
I think that's how
So
it's set up, though, so that it seemed to be looking around the ground that people were grouped at the ends of rows, bunched in the ends of rows. And that way, I think that what they're trying to do is that if there's a case, they're isolating it to, 20, 30 people. Um, that seemed to be the way they were um, organising the seating anyway. But it was interesting that I didn't notice any other sort of social distancing measures in place at the ground. And certainly when I caught the train home,
mm,
Metro trains waited until the train was absolutely jam packed before going, and I was sort of staggered that we'd gone through this whole process of not being able to sit in our normal seats, having to log on in the middle of the day, which, as George and Bin Man have pointed out, is extremely inconvenient for a whole range of reasons, this whole Ticketex system. And then you get on the train afterwards and the COVID safety's thrown out the window anyway. So what's the point if it's not going to be matched the whole way through?
it was interesting because when I went to the Marvel Stadium game, the practice match, they had blocked off bays, sort of 4 or 5 bays were sort of, blocked off. You couldn't walk around the ground or walk to any bay that wasn't within your sort of limit. But I didn't notice any of that at the MCG. I had to, from where I was sitting, to get food, I'd have to go downstairs. So you're mixing in with everyone else. So yeah, it's all a bit of COVID theatre. So hopefully, as the numbers go up, well, hopefully we get, as in not the COVID numbers, the amount that they let in, 75. Hopefully, it gets to 100%, and they just go. But do you think when it gets to 100%, we'll be able to sit in our seats and they'll just go back to normal, or do you think once it's 100%, they'll still make us go through this rigmarole of getting tickets the way?
God, you'd hope it goes back to normal, wouldn't you? I mean, I saw on Demonland that some Redlegs supporters ended up in the Ponsford stand. And I thought, well, if that was me, I'd be complaining to the club. Um, I'm usually a Trident and ended up in the Red League section and in basically an equivalent part of the ground on the other side of the stadium. But had I been shuffled off to the Ponsford, I wouldn't be happy.
Well, ironically, it would be the opposite for me.
Yeah.
And
Well,
speaking of Ponsford, as I said, I couldn't go, but it was really nice of Fox Footy to have the Ponsford camera angle happening for me. That was. Did you notice in the on the replay the high shot from above? That they were, I don't know what, was it, whether that was a drone or is it the thing that goes across the ground, or but quite spectacular. The Ponsford angle.
yeah, and just one more thing on this seating, Andy. Um, I actually ran into, as I mentioned before, I ran into George at the game, and it was interesting because George, as we know, is George in the outer. But when I saw him at the footy, he wasn't in the outer at all. He was actually in a part of the stadium reserved for the premier members. And I'm just wondering whether it's not time for a name change for George. Perhaps, if he George in the outer is out, maybe we can call him King George.
Or George in the toffee seats.
Well, I was a bit worried actually when I got my seats, because I was in the red leg section, which is in the southern stand, and I'm used to sitting on the in the Olympic stand, sort of on the opposite half forward flank. So I had a similar aspect that I usually watch the games at, so I was happy with that. But I was a bit worried that I might get the sun in my eyes, but luckily I was enough rows back to not sort of have the sun on me. I like to be shaded um, from the sun while I go to the footy and not cook like I did out in Perth. But yeah, I was a bit worried, and I know that those seats later in the year, sort of late in when you have games later in the game, you can get the sun directly into your eyes. So I was a bit worried, and I'm just hoping that things go back to normal and I get my seat back. But that's first world problems.
Yeah, you're not doing
at the
much,
moment.
Andy, for D's fans' reputation. Rough, tough sort of go anywhere, anytime football fans. No wonder there was only 21,000 people with soft fans like that. Geez, they have no whatever hat.
The big drama for me is that you had to go downstairs to get chips.
Yes,
Whereas
yes.
over in the Olympic, the chips are about just a few feet from a seat. So I wasn't happy
You know,
about that, and I'll be
And I
writing
get
to
the
Gary
Beamer
Pert.
was very worried that my cheese platter would melt. It's just disgraceful.
Just to make it even worse for you all, I'm actually Lord George. I own 1 square foot of a block of land somewhere in Ireland or England or something like that, and I've got a title to it. So,
There you go.
and as a landowner, you're entitled to be the Lord. So, and I've got a certificate to that end. So that really confirms the status of Melbourne supporters, doesn't it?
Are you
Well, I think
allowed to take up a seat in the House of Lords, Ben?
Oh, I would hope so. Yeah.
Very good.
I have a plot of land on the moon as well as a star named after me. So, yeah, I think I beat you.
Can we build a
Um,
training base there?
Well, you're speaking of training bases, where Grapeviney and I interviewed Gary Pert last on Friday. Um, we did talk about the training base, and well,
The
the
pertinent
news is
issue, you might say.
there is no further news, and I'm less and less optimistic about us ever getting finding a home base. Grapeviney, what were your thoughts on what Gary said? I mean, there's
Yeah,
nothing new there.
look, that was the crucial question, and there really wasn't much light around it. I think we tried to get him to commit to an announcement this year, but we didn't even get that. He sort of
It
said that there'd be more information.
announcement about announcement. That was basically.
Yeah, and so I think the sort of the skepticism from supporters is warranted in this instance. And look at, I think, Gary's a confident media performer. He's been in the game for a long time. I note that someone wrote in the thread after listening to the interview that it's one thing for him to be able to give up all these great answers on the about what's happening on the footy field, but his core business is what's happening off the field, and people weren't as impressed with his answers on that front as perhaps what he said about the footy stuff. And I'm including, I guess, in that his answer regarding the exit from pokies and what's in place to replace that revenue, which I think you asked him. I don't think people were too impressed with his answer on that front either.
He seemed to still think. We asked him about the membership targets of 75,000. He seems to still see that that's a realistic achievement, and well, whether it is or isn't, I think it's wholly dependent on us winning games and being successful and consistently successful.
Which he admitted, but there's got to be something else around that rather than just we're going to win games.
Yeah, but how you can't. I don't think you can put bums on seats unless you are successful. That's it comes down to that. I don't think all the marketing and advertising in the world not going to unless you improve your performances on a consistent basis.
I thought that it was a fantastic interview. I was saying to Andy before we came on that I think probably just about the best interview on from the Demonland podcast, and there's been a lot of really good ones. I thought it was a terrific interview. But on that point, just from a personal perspective, I would have loved a follow-up question about the value proposition for members, Andy, in terms of building your membership. As you know, I've been banging on for a while about, I don't think the club's comms to members is particularly strong. It's an area we've improved in, but I really mean not so much the videos and the player interviews that don't really interest me much. It's more about the specifics. And in particular, I was sort of a bit head up about the lack of information about the Casey Hawks VFL practice game. But it's sort of for me, it's also the lack of information about injuries, the lack of information even about the game, for instance, that was played on the weekend. Given it's critical. Fans want to know that stuff, and for me, Pert mentioned that the key revenue stream is sponsorship and membership. And membership is, you need a value proposition for it. Diehards like us, well, we'll pay it, we'll get our membership. But for others, you need to have a value proposition, particularly for a team that's not regularly playing finals and doesn't have a home base. And I think they really need to pick up their game in that area. I wrote to them on the back of that. I wrote an email, still haven't received a response 8-9 days back later. Now, I understand they're under the pump, and I don't want to be overly critical because they got smashed. Their admin got smashed just like other footy clubs. But putting out tweets about the Casey game is cost free, basically, and a lot of fans want that sort of information. So. I think that's an area they could improve. And because you sort of touched on it, great, when you asked him about the Fans Day and about the idea of that connection. And to be fair, they had those Zoom calls last year, which were really good. They haven't had them this year though, and now's the time to do them. They're pretty much cost free apart from time, and so I think it's an area they've got to improve.
Yeah, we were particularly asking because through COVID, obviously, we don't get that, that one-on-one interaction like through the family day, through the best and fairest. I don't know what's going to happen this year. Obviously, we didn't have the family day. He sort of intimated that perhaps the family day might be later in the year at some point when we can do those things. And if we are heading into this time, it depends on what happens with COVID. Maybe we'll get that, but they've really got to provide some more value-added stuff. I definitely agree with that. But do you think that the rank and file, obviously the hardcores of us want Casey updates, but do you think Casey updates are going to,
Well, no,
be enough for?
not in of itself. I mean, it's part of a suite of things, and it's not just Casey updates. We made a strategic decision to go with Casey and not our own VFL team. Now, we probably couldn't afford to have our own VFL team, but nonetheless, there's the Casey Demons, there's the AFLW team, and there's the men's team. We made that call, and in that Casey game, and just like the one on the weekend, but in that Hawks game, we had Dore playing. We had 5 or 6 senior players. They're our reserves team. They're not just Casey. They're the Casey Demons who are restructured. They've changed their jumper. They've changed their name. Our coaching systems are aligned. If no other reason, we should be investing in Casey as a footy team. But there were 6 players, and given the fact that we haven't been able to attend training over the break, that there has been that separation with COVID. I mean, it's just basic minimal stuff for me. It's just what good fan engagement is. And sure, not everyone wants that information, but people like me who do, well, it should be part of the value proposition. So,
Because I guess you would talk. Was it you talking about how I think I think you would mention Carlton do some more analysis stuff for their members, and we're not doing stuff like that. Do you think we're not doing stuff like that and giving, injury updates because we don't want to give stuff away from a footy department point of view? What would you like to see?
the issues predated COVID. So there's, of course, the issues to do with the fact that you've probably had half your staff going. So I don't want to go I don't want to be unfair, but this was an issue beforehand. It's not like I've suddenly come to this sort of frustration with their comms. But for me, there's been too much emphasis on video interviews with players, which, of course, a lot of people like, and that's fine. They've got their place. But what I want to know about is I'd never go to the MFC website at all. Like literally, I go to Demonland to find out when the game's on, what's happening. That's it's just not an information source for me. So I want to be able to go there and know what tactical information is. Have some interviews with the coaches. Discussion about our upcoming game, like Carlton do have. Who have we got to watch out in the opposition? All of that sort of stuff is, for me, part and parcel of what a member should get. Of course, not everyone's as interested in it as me, but I'm one of the members, so.
Fair enough. Another thing that came out of that grapevine, did you get the sense when we were talking about Darren Burgess and sort of asked whether, how hard is it going to be to retain his services next year? I got the feeling he's not going to be with us next year.
Yeah,
I understand there's family issues. Family issues, meaning his family is in South Australia, and him being here. So I just got the impression that we'll be losing his services
yeah, nothing
no matter
particularly,
what we throw at him.
nothing particularly reassuring on that front, and you can understand it really. I guess we're lucky to have him even this year, um, given the arrangements, the living arrangements with his family over there. So, yeah, make the most of it while we can, I guess, and steal as much IP as we can.
That was a great follow-up question, Andy, and yeah, it didn't leave me very confident that he'd be at the club at the end of the year. The other good follow-up question was the one about the money grapevine, I thought, in terms of the Leoke, isn't it? The close of the pokies, and as you say, it was a bit of a sort of nothing answer, but it did occur to me, and I hadn't thought of it previously. Pert didn't point this out, but if they'd kept Leoke, there would have been pretty much 12 months of no income from pokies, wouldn't it? Because the pokies were shut all last year in Melbourne.
Mm.
So we wouldn't have got hardly any income from Leoke apart from any of the asset increase or, on the property or so the clubs that had pokies and invested in pokies like the Hawks, I think, is it the Hawks or the Cats?
Hawks and Carlton.
The Carlton, they wouldn't have got they wouldn't have got any money from pokies last year or revenue from pokies. So I was surprised he didn't make that point himself because, in some respects it was very lucky timing to divest themselves of pokies.
Mm. Yep.
We haven't totally divested in the sense that the Bentley Club was still operating, but just from a financial perspective, the COVID close down of the pokies actually tells us exactly how much money we have to cover, which I've based on the difference between the previous year and this year was about $2.8 million.
From the pokies that we do have still.
From the poke, yeah. So they were operating in the previous financial year and not for the whole of the current year, but that gives us a fairly good idea. So we have to make another $2.8 million just to stay where we are.
Yep.
And I think that's the critical question for the CEO and the board in the coming year, particularly, or once the Bentley Club in 2022 gets sold off or whatever they do with that, and we lose the pokey revenue. The license for that expires, I think, in 2022. So, where are we going to find another $2.8 million? Big
George,
question.
you did some math on that. I saw in one of the threads in terms of membership, how many members you need to make that shortfall, and what did that turn out to be?
Turned out to be somewhere about 30%. We have to increase the membership by 30%, and that's just to stay where we are.
It's not going to happen.
Like I said, it's a big question for the current board, and I think the current board and the president are under notice for this year around the training base, around the revenue situation, about the investment situation, where the club finds itself. I noted today there was an article in the Age about Jeffrey Kennett and the training base that they're trying to establish at Dingley. Estimates are that it's going to cost them about $100 million, and the article was pointing out that there are ructions being caused by the fact that Jeffrey, being a Liberal Party stalwart, is also head of the Hawthorn Football Club, and there's not much love lost between him and the current government, but they're seeking $50 million from the current government to partly fund this. So $50 million potentially going to Hawthorn, and if that happens and Melbourne's left out in the lurch again, I don't see the current board lasting beyond the end of this year.
That was the other good question, because that was, I think, the follow-up question from you, Andy, about that. He didn't have much in terms of confidence. It left no one really with any confidence we're going to have anything happening in the next little while. And geez, it makes that investment in Casey all the more important. It's not great, is it?
No, but look, I think where they've done a good job is in retaining sponsorships. They've added a few sponsors. I don't think any of us are privy to the details of what concessions they've made to keep some of these sponsors on, but it is good. I think we bought another one of the t-shirt sponsors for the coaches. Better Banking or Better Bank, I don't want to get their name wrong, give them a plug, has come on board. So it's good to see that they are still able to get some people on it in these tough financial times.
Yeah.
Um,
Though I'd be curious whether how fixed they are on this idea it has to be within a certain distance of the MCG, because it seems to me, I'm not sure what's happening with the Fisherman's Bend redevelopment, but surely there's an opportunity in that space down there where they'll be crying out for green fields or parklands, I should say, in that area when they do finally develop down there. And surely there's an opportunity to get a win-win with the state government down there to have a footy club and invest in local community facilities in the same way that, say, Arden Street has in North Melbourne has at Arden Street. It just doesn't seem to be likely to happen in the MCG precinct.
you don't want it too far away. I know that's Fishman Bend. Is that near Port Melbourne?
15 kilometres from the G.
Yeah, it's on the other side of Melbourne. Come on.
That might be bad down there too, actually.
It's on the south side of the Yarra, isn't that okay? It's not north.
It's much further away than Docklands, which is my big problem. So, no, I won't be heading out there.
Well, I'm in Altona, so
Yeah.
I could ride my bike there, put it on the punt, and be at training in half an hour.
Too industrial for me.
Melbourne Grammar have got their training ground down there,
Oh,
Well, there you go.
There you go.
so if they can do it,
could be something in the offing.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, let's move it on, unless someone else wants to pipe in with anything. AFLW, George, and Bin Man. I guess you're our two AFLW men. I guess. Go on, Grapevine.
Well, I've watched virtually every game of the AFLW.
I wasn't aware of that.
Mind you, on the weekend, I didn't get to see it live, so I taped it and didn't look at the scores and came on later. And I watched a half time and was very impressed. And then I went back to the menu to skip through half time and accidentally deleted it. So I missed the second half of the weekend's game to my own stupidity, and realised I probably did myself a favour, given that I think we only kicked one goal after half time, and it seemed like we were in a bit of a heart stop or a heart stopper. So perhaps it
was an important goal though. That we did kick.
Right at the end, was it? Yeah.
What were you saying, Andy, about Melbourne's ageing fan base? Grapevine taped it, and his VHS tape got all wound up. He couldn't work out the technology.
No, it was on the Foxtel, and I accidentally just deleted it instead.
Well, if you got KO, you can go back and watch you can watch it again.
It needs a smartphone for that. But just go back to the technology of Foxtel. I think you have to press about 3 different buttons to delete something. So,
yep.
Yes, George Binman, Grapevine, the last 2 weeks have been 2 massive games. We were ending the season with 3 very tough games, having to play Adelaide, who have been one of the best teams in the AFLW competition since its inception, have to go over to Perth in scorching heat and play Fremantle, who have been fantastic this year. I think they were top of the ladder going into this round. And then our final round next week, well, we don't even need to win to make the finals now, but it could shape who we play in the finals. They have to play Brisbane, who have also been outstanding this year. So it was a tough ask going into the last 3 rounds, and we've won two of the 3. So yeah, take it away, George.
Yeah, what a contrast between even the Melbourne men's team last year and the women's team this year, going into the games knowing that you have to win this particular game or one of the 2 remaining games, like we did, like the men's team did last year, and the girls really, really stuck in there and did exactly what they had to do. And even though Grapevine's wiped off the second half and only expecting to see 1 goal, it wasn't just the 1 goal, it was just the sheer determination and the doggedness against a very good Fremantle side. And while they're playing in 35 degrees of heat, it was a really tough, well fought out game, and all credit has to go to the girls to achieve a win in those conditions. Everything that could possibly be thrown against them was thrown against them, and they came out with flying colours. So very pleased with that. Do you want to talk about the game itself or the Adelaide situation, Andy? Or
Yeah,
I was
go
just going to
for
say
it.
that you talk about the toughness, and the week before against Adelaide,
Mm.
that third quarter
Great
of
game.
footy was probably the best contested footy I've seen in the women's game over the years, and the ability of the girls to stand up in that situation and dig in, and not not concede was just sensational. And they've turned in some stellar performances this year. Some really exciting, free-flowing football, and at other times really tight, tough, hard, contested footy. So it's great to watch.
That Adelaide game was one of the most enjoyable Melbourne Football Club games I've watched, in all seriousness, in years. It was just fantastic. It was inspirational. Just their attack on the footy was incredible. Skills were terrific. I thought they coached well. Zanker into the middle was a masterstroke, and she dominated. She was, getting good distance from the clearances. I think, Andy, we won those clearances, so that was pretty important, actually. But it was just a fabulous game of footy. It was a different game, the one on the Freo game. We jumped out, we got to a 3-goal lead, and then it was just like it was watching them come back. And Freo, a terrific side, the marking skill and their tackling skill is fantastic. And it was, it was hard to see them winning that game. I think, Andy, you were on the game day thread and you said you had to leave or couldn't watch the end of the game. And it didn't look like we were going to win at that point. And that goal, which was the goal you missed, Grapevine, was such a clever bit of play from Daisy Pearce, who had a 50 and only ran to about 20 metres or 30 metres of that 50 and kicked it long to Gay one out, who really just outfoxed her opponent and went back and iced it from 30 metres, and that was enough to get us across the line. It was a thrilling win, and it would have been a huge challenge to come back after the heat and also losing Goldie in that last quarter to have a must-win game this week. So the fact that we don't have that is fantastic. And just the other thing was on Goldie, she did a hammy, so hopefully it's not too bad. But she did it in a desperate lunge. They'd got it out the back. Freo got it out the back, and she just lunged at the ball and put enough pressure on the Freo player to stop them. It would have been an easy goal if they'd grabbed that. They would have been, I think, to run into an open goal. When she did a hammy on the sort of final lunge of it, it was just inspirational, which might be the difference between us having a shot at the flag this year and not.
It's interesting you talk about moving Eden Zanker into the middle and what an inspired move that's been. And it's the same with Daisy Pearce going forward. I actually thought she struggled a bit earlier in the year and wasn't getting into the games too much at half back. But, she's impacted every game that every game since she's moved forward and getting a lot more of the footy.
Really stick out.
Yeah. Yep.
Same as Paxman. Paxman's such a clever. But then you look at Bannon and McNamara, such clever footballers and natural footballers, and it makes such a difference.
I think the I think the coaching staff woke up about halfway through the season and have actually changed when they've done all those structural moves. They've actually woken up to the way the game's being played. I've mentioned this before. We were previously a handball, short kick style of play, and we've changed dramatically to a much longer kicking, tougher, harder at the ball type of team, which is what all the successful sides this year have been. If you have a look at the way St Kilda, for example, are playing, they're still playing that old short kick, handball, move the ball that way sort of thing. But when you look at the Collingwoods and the Fremantles, it's looking more and more like the men's game in that sense. And while they're two different games, the bodies are getting stronger, the bodies are getting fitter. And we've actually changed our complete way of playing. It's they moved Daisy up to the forward line, and she's really smart. She's not as fast as she used to be, but you saw her a couple of times in that Fremantle game where she just positioned herself beautifully to get under her opponent. That final kick to go was just an absolute ripper. That basically won the game for us. She was smart enough to run up and really put the pressure once you got that 50 metres, not just to run to the whole 50 metres. She saw the opportunity and opened it up, as Binman just said. The other thing that they did was they got Cunningham out of the forward line. Now, she's been in there because she's about 9 foot tall, but the trouble is she's not really good overhead. So putting Daisy up forward all of a sudden meant you've got a target that's going to mark the ball, and they put Cunningham into the ruck backup ruck position, and she's been doing very well in that. She can throw a weight around a lot more in the middle than what she's capable of doing up in the forward line. Then, of course, Sanka moved into the middle as well to give the support to Paxman and Mithen. And so all around those moves have just been, all positives around the whole ground. So the back line's been fantastic, even in the absence of Daisy. That Colvin and Birch and Goldrick have just been so solid. I think it was it Birch or Colvin got a head knocked in pretty dramatically in the game.
Colvin.
I can't remember. Colvin, yeah. They're tough. They're tough girls. Really tough girls.
Didn't she? And then speaking of tough, Grapevine, you with your tape mangling up, you in the second half, you missed a pretty big melee at the end of the last quarter. We made a huge blunder with 3 goals up at that point, and we'd done super well to hold off Freo because really they dominated the third quarter. Really, Freo. We did well to keep our lead, and they did one of those heartbreaking, only Melbourne can do it, crosses the target from about 40 metres and hit the ground, and Roxy Rue came in and made us pay, and then I think it was Colvin, perhaps it was, let her know. It was right in her face, and there was like a 20 woman sort of melee at the end of that quarter. So hopefully the Demon team got into them at the end of it and pointed out who won that game.
I can tell you one thing. Follow a number of the Demon players on Instagram, and the camaraderie among the girls is excellent. It seems like they're all having a ball, and that obviously helps.
And I've been pumping up the AFLW commentary, but that's come to a crashing halt. Who was that fella, Will Show? What was his story?
Schofield.
What a top spot.
Yep.
I've really enjoyed the commentary all year. Unfortunately, we played over in Perth, and obviously we had the Perth commentary team, and they were all but barracking for Fremantle the entire match. I don't know if it was because they were behind, or sometimes commentators like the underdog. Not that they're going into the match they're underdogs, but because we were so far ahead. But they were barracking, and it's quite frustrating when you're the opposition supporter and you have to hear commentary akin to the 5AA in South Australia.
Press red for Ed.
And Andy, I know this is not on the run sheet, but just really briefly, in that the commentary, something that really I find frustrating with how many ex-footballers involved in commentary in Aussie rules is, I forget the Melbourne player, but the Freo player pinned her arms and swung her. And he even described it the way the Freo player did, to lever her down, and was complaining about that being I forget what the name of the tackle, a sling tackle, but too rough. It's exactly why that rule was brought in. And he was saying, this is not, he practically said, this is not netball or whatever. It was why the
Yeah.
rule was brought in, because she could not protect her head. Her arms were pinned. I was thinking about it. And then at the end I happened to be watching the end of the Hawthorn Essendon game, and Darcy was talking after the game, and he was talking about the hit that Dangerfield put on, I forget the player that he knocked out, Kelly, and he was saying he shouldn't go. That was, what else could he do? And I was like, that's absolutely ridiculous. He went through him. That was all day, every day. That's a reportable offence. And Darcy was basically giving him a free pass, and it's because he's an ex-footballer.
If you look at the vision, I posted a tweet, not my tweet, on Demonland, of the reverse angle, and you see Dangerfield get up and make an absolute beeline for Kelly, and accelerated, and for him to claim that he was protecting
And that he
himself.
didn't have another choice. Oh,
Yeah, he had so many choices. He could have not gone at him, which obviously you got to try and stop the player, but he could have smothered, he could
he could
have
have tackled.
put his arms up, he could have tackled. There was so many options for him to do, even pull out of knocking him out. Um,
And the reason he didn't tackle is because the ball had already passed him.
well past him.
Yeah. So it was unbelievable that Darcy was defending him.
So we can talk quickly about Dangerfield because he's going to miss the game against Melbourne. Does anyone know what his options are in terms of? Because I know a lot of Melbourne supporters were quite pessimistic, as we are, thinking that he's going to get let off and get 2 weeks and not miss our game. And not that we want, all right, you want to play the best team, but it always helps if one of their best players is out. Does he have any? What do you call it? Appeal. Can he appeal? Because didn't he plead guilty?
Yeah, I don't know whether an appeal is possible or not. I might be
Appeal
wrong,
the sentence?
but the concern for him is that they pleaded guilty to the charge and were trying to downgrade it in terms of severity. Now that was dismissed by the tribunal, so I suspect that they might have run out of argument. Effectively, what are they going to? They brought up a couple of other cases of severe, what were classified as severe, including the A and B sling tackle, and saying that the Dangerfield hit wasn't the same as this, but that was dismissed by the tribunal. So I don't know how they're going to, if they were to appeal, would find any grounds for appeal effectively. So yeah, I think they might just walk away from this and accept it.
What did he get? I didn't hear.
3
3
weeks.
weeks.
He was lucky he should have got 4, I reckon,
Mm.
because is he got a position with the AFL?
Yeah, he's the president, I
But I
believe.
mean, this in the sort of context of concussion and the sort of players like McCartan out of the game for basically ever because of it. For him to be not just sort of fessing up for it and going, yeah, that's not on, in that position as president is just rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a serious issue. There was don't know if anyone watched the thing on 60 Minutes the other week. This concussion and the repercussions of concussion later in life is terrible. So yeah, I
And
agree.
we've had the death of Tuck this year, and clearly it was related to, well, the implication is it was related to, I forget, what is it, CTE?
CTE.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dangerfield not going to play. We can talk about that in a couple of weeks. But just quickly, before we go on to the St Kilda game, just finishing off the AFLW in terms of the run home. Does anyone, perhaps you do, George, know how the finals work in AFLW under this new system. It seems we've had a new system every year. We've got a top 6 now. If we finish 5th, who do we play? Do we play second or?
Short answer is no, I don't know. um, what I suspect, given the results of the other games, is that we really can't improve our position
No.
dramatically. You're not going to move Brisbane. You're not going to move Fremantle from where they are.
Well, we're not. We don't have the percentage.
No,
I know
no.
we have. Who's Freo playing? Freo is playing North Melbourne. So
Yeah,
if North
yeah.
knock them off, North can overtake us if we lose.
Yeah, that's the only thing that can change. But the percentages of the other two and even Adelaide's is far too great for us to get any further
Yeah.
than where we are, sort of thing.
But we are like Collingwood could beat Adelaide and we can win, and Freo can lose, and we can overtake those two teams and finish third. But it requires them to lose. But it can happen. We can jump positions because we are equal with Freo and Adelaide at the moment.
Is there an AFLW ladder predictor?
I don't know. Probably not.
Quality. That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
The good thing is that we've beaten two seriously good sides in the last 2 weeks. Really serious. We're not just talking about finishing in the finals this year. We're going to be challenging for the premiership. Adelaide beat the Western Bulldogs by 56 points in their last game. So we haven't had the luxury of playing against, like Fremantle played twice against West Coast. We haven't played against Geelong, which all the other high scoring or high percentage teams in the six have had the advantage of doing. So we've been sort of shafted a bit by the fixture, and others have been advantaged by the fixture. But the good teams this year, at least, are in the finals compared to what's happened in the previous years. But we've beaten two really serious sides in the last 2 weeks, and if we beat Brisbane this week, the other sides are going to be very, very worried about who they're coming up against Melbourne.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that Freo had played West Coast twice, and I know it was all COVID related. But going forward, I mean, what's the best way to even up this competition? Do they need to play everyone once? But now that they are playing during the men's season in the past, they sort of finished on round one, but now they've gone deep into we'll go deep after the finals. 3-4 weeks into the men's season, is it time to sort of even it up and at least play each other once?
I think there's no doubt that has to happen. Previously, there was a lack of players available and teams available. We've passed that point, I think. So you've got to make it even for everyone, including the teams in Western Australia and Brisbane and up in Brisbane and Queensland. They've got to travel as well, but everybody's got to travel and. Give the opportunity, and while there's this differential, unfortunately, between the new teams as they come in, like the Geelongs and the West Coast, you can't hand one or two teams a huge advantage, which is obviously going to affect the premiership position at the end of the year, premiership ladder position at the end of the year, simply because the others haven't had the chance to play them. So at least once has to come in, and if it's played at the same time as the men's competition, well, so be it.
Yeah, totally.
I believe Hawthorn's coming in. Are there other teams?
Port Adelaide, I think, want to have a side as well, but I think the AFL will put that off as long as possible because of the lack of quality players available. The fact that Geelong and West Coast easy beats at the moment. They don't want wipeout games. It's not good for the competition and the viewers. So I think they'll put those ones off as long as possible. I can't remember when they're promised, and indeed if they have promised when they'll come in, but they're certainly pushing from both those clubs to get it. They see that the future now in AFLW and want to be part of it.
All right, let's move on. cast our eye at a game, upcoming game this Saturday night. Changes there might be a few. I would guess Viney is going to be back in the team. We've got players Melksham, Hibbard, uh, possibly Bin Man. Who do you see coming in this week?
Yeah, well, it depends a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they keep Hunt in. I mean, as I said, I think he's on thin ice. He didn't get enough possessions, but I just wonder whether sort of the way they've got structure, they think they need his pace and his ability to cover the ground. And given they've run with him early on, maybe they'll give him another go. It seems a bit strange to, this is you put your flag in the ground in that opening round to change it up too much after a win. You said Viney's fit, isn't he? He's going to come back in. So
Apparently played 4 quarters, but that doesn't mean he's straight in. But
and yet we don't really know that because we didn't get any information about that.
no.
Melksham's not, I don't think. So it's hard to know. Some people sort of said that Sparrow's tackled well, 6 tackles. I didn't think he was very impressive, didn't make really good decisions. If Viney comes in, you'd think, wouldn't he? I mean, 100% he'll come. Sparrow seems to be the logical player to swap out for him. I wouldn't be surprised if that's it.
Great, Viney.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's it either. It's a winning team. We won comfortably. Isn't that enjoyable when you go to the footy and for most of the game you don't really feel threatened? I certainly felt that way on the weekend. So I can see them making very minimal changes. So it's quite possible just the one.
Well, I did feel threatened, but then again, won a game a couple of years ago by 90 points and deep into the last quarter, I was still on the edge of my seat. But that's my MFC SS coming through. George.
The question is, has been Ma'am just mentioned, because we don't know the performance of the individuals in that practice. If Hibbard was playing well enough, then you'd have to bring him in for Hunt, but we don't know that. And again,
the club did post 54 photos from the game, so if you can glean anything from that.
Yeah, exactly. That's about all you can glean. These are the decisions that coaches have to make. We don't know the true nature of where they sit in terms of preparation for the game. Hunt didn't do himself any favours in this game. I think Sparrow will be stiff simply because Viney's available. He'll get plenty of more chances during the year. Beyond those 2 possibilities, I don't think there's any need for any further changes. Like Great Viney just said, it's a winning side. You don't need to change too much.
And just on, I didn't sort of mention, didn't jump in before about Jones when you fellas were talking about Jones. Last year, he would have been discussed in this context. So he'll come out surely for Viney. And I think it's interesting that, we didn't even part of that discussion. A mate of mine was saying that he's the sort of player that some of the older players will actually do well this season with the longer quarters, who are physically strong and can take, it's not just the aerobic challenges of the extra quarters and the lower, the 75 rotations. It's also ability to physically cope with, being smashed for 120 minutes. And so players of his age who have got through their career pretty well without too many serious injuries. He had his neck injury and a couple of other things, but he's been a super durable player, Jones. As you said before, George, he's going to get to 300 for sure. And, at halfway through last year, you wouldn't have put money on it, would you, that he'd even get a contract, let alone get to 300.
Big man, do you want to you wanted to talk about the St Kilda game from maybe a tactical perspective, or how we're going to approach it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, two things. First thing was that I watched a bit of that game too, George, the GWS Saints game, and they've got a particular style. It was like, even though it was wet, that way they play. Obviously, Richardson brought the intel last year, and we really looked to shut down that switch last year. Worked super hard. It was a pity we couldn't do it for one more week the following week against the Dogs, but I think that, we were very clever the way we played them last year. It's going to be a critical game because we're really two teams tracking at about the same point in our development. Arguably, we should be ahead of them in that development curve. But, let's say for the sake of argument, we're fighting for a position. They're coming back after it was a slogging game. That was a tough game in the wet conditions. They travelled up to Sydney. I'm not sure, George, whether they what injuries they might have got out of that game. But, we played pristine conditions and we've got an extra day's rest. So it sets up well for us from that perspective. And as we've talked about over the years, we play Docklands pretty well. I think that, tactically we've got two very different styles. So it's really, our best chance is obviously running hard defensively to cover that switch, and if we're not on in that sense, then they will cut us up. But I think St Kilda struggle when oppositions bring the full heat because it's a game style that relies on your ability to work your way through, transition the ball quickly, and if you can stop that transition, they get a bit stuck. They're not that strong up forward, and they're not rebounding off the half-back flanks, certainly, like sort of the Tigers do. So it sort of sets up really interestingly from a tactical perspective because we have got two quite distinct styles.
It's interesting, isn't it? They'll have Max King back this week, so that'll provide a fabulous target up forward for them. But I think their problem, like I alluded to before, is down their back line. They are really weak down there. Toby Green virtually nearly won the game off his own boot last week against a very, very ordinary defence. They really depend on that fast transition slingshot type of game that the Dogs employed so successfully a couple of years ago. But as you mentioned, if we can employ the same type of tactic to shut down the people like the Greshams and the Hills, and the Billings,
and the ex-Richmond player, what's Butler, he's critical to that transition, and if you can shut the space that he's got to run into, it really takes his strength away.
Yeah, the really big positive we have is Max Gawn because they're missing Marshall and Ryder at the moment. They were using McKernan last week, who is just a big log effectively. He just stands there and doesn't do very much around the ground. So Max has a huge advantage, hopefully, that we can exploit. But I think we're reasonably safe. Again, we were talked about the very first thing in this podcast was about the brick wall defence. If they can't get through the Mays and the Levers and the rest of the players down there, they're really going to struggle. Tim Membry's the only one who saves his best for us. You can guarantee 3 goals from him, but the rest of their goals last week came from, like I said, out the back mistakes that the GWS made, and one absolute howler of an umpiring decision in the last 2 minutes that got them over the line. I hope they don't get that this week to get them the 4 points.
Just looking at their injury list, they got King coming back, and they reckon Zach Jones is expected to be selected. Other than that, no one else is back from injury.
If Zach Jones has a decent game, you can expect a week of recrimination on Demon Land that we got the wrong Jones, or that we should have tried harder to get the brothers together. That's pretty much a given also, isn't it?
Yeah. And if we get beaten in clearances, even if we win by 6 goals, if we get smashed in the clearances, it'll be, what's Max doing? We don't get enough advantage out of him. And Yeah, that's for sure going to come up.
Yeah, I'll be bringing that up for sure. Definitely on this
You
podcast.
might be right, Andy, because it's a night game, so the sun should be. Are you going to go, or you don't go to the Docklands?
It's a bit too far from the MCG. No. If I can get a ticket, yeah.
That I was just the thing about last week's games is, you know, I think for me it was a much better game than what. Well, again, on Demonlands, it's hard to know how sort of representative of general Melbourne fans that are to a degree. But I thought it was a pretty strong critique of our performance, and to bank 4 points. Am I right to say that's the first round one game we've won since 2017?
That's correct.
When you think that Geelong got beaten over in a game that that I think the first time since 1971, a team that's played off in the grand final, beaten by the previous year's wooden spooner. The Lions got rolled by the Swans, and Essendon got rolled by Hawks. All three teams who will be seriously competing within the finals, and GWS you have to throw into that mix as well. All haven't started with 4 points, and we've started with banking in the 4 points. It's just super critical. You cannot underestimate how important those 4 points are, and just starting that way, because if we'd lost, then the whole tone would be different coming into this game, wouldn't it? It'd be all about a must. Suddenly it's a must-win game, because after this, we've got Geelong the week after, or is it
GWS.
GWS,
you know,
then Geelong.
Then
all four teams, so all those teams, all the next three teams are all ones we're going to be competing directly with. And if we come into this game, this coming up with having lost against Freo, we'd be seriously under the pump and on the back foot right from the get-go.
Yep. All right. Just before we go, have any of you guys watched the Amazon Prime series Making Their Mark, based on last year's season?
I finished it. Yeah, I've watched all, I think 6 episodes.
Yeah, I think there's 6 or 7. I've watched 3, so no spoilers. I don't want to know who won the grand final yet. But what were your thoughts, B-Man, on just the production, and were you disappointed there was not much Melbourne
Very
content?
disappointed. I was like, when the games kept coming up for the D's games, like, come on, show us a bit more action.
There was
Yeah, I thought
there was one. I'll just interrupt you for a sec. There was one thing I was really disappointed in. I think it was the second episode, and it was one of the main themes of it was the Black Lives Matter, and with Eddie Betts and um, and his thoughts about that, and it culminated in them showing the Melbourne Carlton game, and them going around in the circle, taking the knee, focusing on Eddie, and you could see directly opposite him was Christian Petrarca, and I was like, yes, they're going to show the Melbourne game. They're going to show us winning the game, and they show them in that circle, Eddie taking the knee, and then the screen fades to black, and that's the end of the episode. And I was so
yeah, much
disappointed.
better for Melbourne fans. I can give you that tip in terms of game time. My overall thing was in production values are incredible. It depends. It's weird who the audience is, because that's an international. It's on their platform internationally, and there's that Sunderland one as well. And so it'd be interesting to know who watches it from an overseas perspective. Very much about the stories. It was like your people. So I think it was Eddie Betts, Peggy O'Neill, Brendan Gale, bloody Hardwick. So it got better. I was a bit disappointed. Not enough footy. The more footy, as the season went on, there was more footy, and some of that action was fantastic. That Nui was the other one, and Cogs,
Caniglio.
who seemed like a sad sack, poor bugger. He had a bad year. So I thought the production values were really good. It'd be fine if it was about Melbourne. It was like catnip for bloody Tigers fans, if you ask me. Some of the insights into the Tigers was interesting from a Melbourne perspective, how powerful the buy-in is from that team in their system. I personally thought Hardwick came across as a total nut job. Cameron even more so. but you could see the players really bought into Hardwick's sort of system and the Tigers' way of playing. And so, it wasn't as good as I'd hope would be my overarching thing. But I tell you, there's talk about them doing one every season. So I just hope they do one just on the Melbourne Footy Club. Fine, then.
Well, we've already had our time in the sun with the To Hell and Back series. But I'll just when you were talking about Richmond, I'm only 3 episodes in, but the last episode was sort of focused a bit on the they're just starting up the season again, and it was the financial impact of sort of COVID and seeing Peggy O'Neill and Brendan Gale sort of like shattered about the financial impact and how it's going to affect them, and it's going to be really tough on them as a club financially. And then I'm thinking, well, they've got 100,000 members. They're winning premierships. I'm sure there are sponsors lining up to throw money at them. But what about us? Like, how are we going to survive something like this? Really, when you see how worried Richmond are, it really hits home that we're certainly not immune from a situation
Yeah.
like we've just seen. So
That was probably one of the most powerful parts of it. And there was I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, Andy, but Brendan Gale has to tell his team that he doesn't sort of name who, but he's got a team meeting over Zoom, basically saying to his admin team that people aren't going to have a role with how he phrased it. And so not all roles will be here going forward, I think was the how he phrased it. And you could see he was just totally shattered by, to tell half of his sort of team that they're not going to have a job.
The other thing I'll ask you just quickly before we finish up, did they add sound effects into the footy parts with the bumping and crunching, or was that sounds from the game?
I assume sounds from the game, and it was really interesting whether I'm not sure how it like that. It seemed some players were mic'd up.
Yeah, how does that work? They can't have one of those big, bulky,
Well,
mics that the reporters have.
following Nadanui going in. No, I presume maybe one of those small mics on them. Like, I don't know how big a mic was, but you could hear them talking in a lot of scenes, and also there was quite a number of shots from inside the huddle, quarter time, 3/4 time huddle. So they must have been wearing mics, because it was definitely real sound.
And those bumps and that's why I asked, every time someone got bumped, it was like you felt it in your bones. Anyway, I thought so far from what I've seen, I thought it's fantastically produced. Production values are incredible.
Cameron must break some sort of world record for. I won't say it. I don't want Demonland to lose its license or.
Swearing.
F-bomb, like literally in one speech, he must say it 35 times, maybe 30 times in about 2 minutes. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Anyway, if you've got Amazon Prime, I recommend having a watch of it. All right, boys. I think we're going to end it there. We'll be back next week. Thank you, George. Thank you, B-Man, and thank you, Grapeviney.
Thank you.
Let's go, Days.
Go D's.
All right.